Good evening and welcome to another episode of JPPI as we continue to follow and track what is happening in Israel's war against Hamas. A lot going on today, as is the case every day, it seems like. Today's focus is going to be on pretty much two topics. We're going to talk a bit about terror financing, which is an interesting dimension of this conflict. We tend to focus until now very much on Israel-US relations and what the military goals are going to be and what is happening on the ground inside Gaza. We'll get a bit about that as well. We're also going to look at what are one of the other ways to potentially choke a terrorist organization. For that, we have an interesting interview I conducted earlier today with Uzi Shiah, who's a former member and official of Israel's internal security agency, the Shin Bet, and then the Mossad, worked for many years on terror financing and terror warfare when it comes to financing and trying to put an end to that. So we'll speak with him. We'll hear from him in a bit. And then we have our own Shuki Friedman, vice president of JPPI, who's with us today, who also has some experience and insight into that issue. We're joined, like most days, with Shmuel Rosner, our senior fellow at JPPI. And today we're joined by Dana van Luzon, a fellow at JPPI with a specific focus on what's happening more domestically, internally inside Israel, and also looking at the comparisons of how the global media is taking a look at Israel. So before we dive into all these fascinating and very important issues, here's the interview that I did earlier today with Uzi Shiah, as I said, former member of the Mossad and the Shabak with a specialty on terror financing. Uzi, it's great to have you with us at JPPI. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So you have this expertise after decades of service in the Shabak and in the Mossad about the financial warfare, and particularly in trying to stop terrorist entities from being able to use money to procure arms and to carry out terrorist attacks. And I'm curious, when you look at what's happening now, obviously in this war against Hamas has been at this for decades, right? For years, in moving money and getting support of specific countries. Where does its money really come from?
Good question. Although Hamas looks like a very small terror entity, I will ask you a question. What is in your estimation, the overall budget of Hamas? Tens of millions.
Tens of millions.
So the overall budget, and I'm really trying to reduce the assumption, is around $1.5 billion yearly. The sources of the money. First, the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is paying Hamas annually something like around between $400 to $500 million, mainly for the salaries for the employees, all kinds of projects, civilian projects, etc., etc., etc. Second, the Qatari money. We are paying in the last couple of years an amount that goes. We are allowing the Qataris to pay like $30 million per month. That's a direct transfer. At the beginning, it was through suitcases. Now it goes through banking channels. But there are additionals. The additional, for example, is the Qatari Foundation, who was assisting the dawah of the Hamas in tens of millions of dollars per year. And the finance of, how should I say, the existence of all the Qatari leadership in Qatar himself.
Also money as well.
Also money as well. So all around.
Not cheap to stay at the Four Seasons in Doha, right? It's not cheap.
Totally not. It's not only them. It's their families. It's not only Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Mashal. It's much more.
Where does, one second, Uzi, there's also, everyone talks about Iran and Iran's funding of Hamas. How does that money get to them?
Most of the money gets through Lebanon. The smoking gun, I will give an example for one smoking gun, is there was a breach to the main bank of Hezbollah, cyber breach, which is called Card al-Hassan. sanctioned by the American from 2009, but still operates in high scales. The bridge disclosed around 400,000 bank accounts. The main bank accounts were not only of Hezbollah's activity, but supporting the Palestinian Intifada. So it means millions of dollars. You can see the amounts, whoever has the ability to get to those data. And then it goes through Lebanese money changers, and through Turkish money changers, it goes to the Gaza Strip. And not also to the Gaza Strip, to Judah and Samaria also.
So now you know this. Yeah, you've worked at this for years. You've been out for a while of the official establishment, but still up to date, definitely with what's happening. But everyone knows this stuff, right? I mean, these banks are supposed to be sanctioned, the Western capitals, and this used to be your job, traveling around explaining this to people to get the Americans, and whether it was the Chinese or it was the Russians or whoever, the French, to crack down, close up bank accounts. Why do people allow this to continue?
It's an excellent question. First, like Iran, like Russia, their entities found ways to bypass the traditional sanction policies. They are faster, more sophisticated, and they find ways to do that. We stayed behind. What was effective 10 years ago is not effective now. So they found ways. Second, Hamas, in the eyes of the West, they didn't consider it as a real terror entity or a real threat. Many countries didn't include Hamas as a terror entity at all. If we take UK as an example, only 2021 they declared Hamas as a terror entity. Before that, Hamas celebrated with all kinds of NGOs inside the UK. So we have to be more proactive and more sophisticated in our combat against this terror financing. It's not only a question of law enforcement, it's a question of the measures that are taken towards those who are assisting Hamas financially. It's not enough to blacklist them. I
mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there, you know, in Hebrew, there's the famous saying, "In kemach in Torah," right? Without flour, there's no Torah, right? You need to be able to eat, to be able to study. You need to have money. Bad comparison, maybe, but you need to have money to buy weapons, to have arms, to fund your activities, right? Money is the fuel that allows for all this terrorist activity to take place. I mean, is it that simple, or am I simplifying it?
It's even simpler. Simpler. I will tell you why. We are speaking about dismantle Hamas as a terror entity. And people would say Hamas is not just a simple terror entity, it's an idea. You can't dismantle an idea.
Right.
You can. Why? Because fighting, not only the money that goes for military terror activity, it's not enough. You have to dismantle what is called the whole Dawa system, the whole civilian system, the system that gives education to kids, to hate, and a system that gives welfare to those families as part of the service that the terror entity gives, the system that gives funding to all the religious institutions, the system that gives funding to companies that are using social media in order to deal with this. You have to dismantle the whole civilian infrastructure, the Dawa system around them. And here we failed. Here we failed, not just the Western world, we as Israeli, because somewhere in late 2000, we stopped dealing with those entities. We stopped dealing with the Dawa system. We dealt specifically, tactically, we didn't look at it in a more strategic.
So basically what happened was, what you're saying, we looked at how to stop the money or suffocate the money for the rockets, but the ideology, we let it spread wide and far with money that went to the mosques and the schools and the welfare and the social activities and all that.
Exactly. If you want to fight a terror entity, you have to find the whole structure of a terror. I didn't say that. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that. One of the most effective tools dismantling a terror entity is cutting all his possibilities to finance all his activities. Mm-hmm. And here we failed. We failed.
You know, over the years, it's interesting the distinction, because we've seen over the years countries, particularly in Europe, when it comes to Hezbollah as an example, say we're banning and outlawing or designating Hezbollah's military wing as a terrorist organization, but not Hezbollah's civilian activities. Or the whole conversation that people sometimes have about the IRGC, the Islamic Republic, Guard Corps in Iran. Also they're careful. Should we or should we not? I mean, the world doesn't get it, it seems.
First, frankly saying, as an Israeli citizen, first we have to get it. Uh-huh. And then we have to convince the world. Hezbollah is a much bigger entity. And we are dealing with the Hezbollah the same way we dealt with Hamas. We are letting them grow and grow and use their dawah system globe-wide, with the Iranian dawah system doing nothing about that. So yes, we have first to explain to ourselves what is needed to be done, and then we can show and explain it to I would say, the civilized world. Because there are countries like Turkey, like Qatar, like Malaysia, which will be very difficult just for ourselves to convince them to stop.
So Uzi, before I let you go, I want to ask just one last question specifically about Qatar. Qatar gives money to Hamas, harbors Hamas officials in Doha, gives them sanctuary, and at the same time, though, plays a game with us and says, we're going to help you get back your hostages. So it's almost, to me, the example I use is if somebody shoots me in the leg and then says, oh, but let me now help stitch that up and fix up your leg. What is Israel supposed to do with the Qataris? How would you recommend managing that situation?
Now it's a little bit too late to try and deal with Qatar, because we have our hostages in the Hamas hands, and unfortunately Qatar, which is evil, is one of the most, if not the only route we can try and negotiate anything about that. But that's the Qatari policy all over, not just with Hamas, with ISIS, with Daesh, with other terror entities. They are actually, from one hand, paying terror entities globe-wide in order to protect themselves. On the other hand, they are paying the Western world globe-wide in order to protect themselves. So they are paying everyone. For us, at the end of the day, if we want to dismantle a terror entity, Qatar is one of the keys. That means Qatar should decide and declare tomorrow, no more support for Hamas, no more Hamas leaders in their territories, no more passports are given to Hamas leaders in order for them to travel to other countries. Nothing. Al Jazeera, no more hatred, no more incitement in Al Jazeera. If they will do that, that will be an answer. But if they don't, we should fight Qatar as a sponsoring terror country. And that's what we should do. As I mentioned, it's not only Qatar, it's Qatar and Turkey. Yeah. Because the whole infrastructure of military and financial infrastructure of Hamas is in Istanbul. Same, Muslim Brotherhood, worldwide.
Yeah. Wow, very, very interesting, and a whole other dimension of this conflict that people tend to not think about. Uzi Shiah, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, that was Uzi Shiah with a very interesting perspective on what it means for terror financing and the battle against that. Shuki, I want to start with you and get your take on this. You know, Uzi had some criticism, right, about that it seems, at least to him, that Israel's not doing enough in that space. What's your take on the issue?
I had the opportunity to work in cooperation with Uzi on the Mossad and trying to convince countries that these two organizations, as Uzi described it, are not separate their activities between civil activity and military arm or military wing, but should be seen as a whole. Now, unfortunately, in many countries, in Europe and other places as well, civil society trying to differentiate between these two wings because they have supporters over there and also interest in different countries that host this organization. For example, if you look at the West Bank, where Hamas also have a lot of power and activities, it's hard for the Palestinian Authority to block all its activities. Palestinians give legitimacy to Hamas up until 7th of October and since then as well. So for countries in the Western world, for countries in the Middle East, and for the Palestinian Authority to work with the civil wing of Hamas looks like a legitimate interest of the Palestinian people. We have to remember that in Gaza, at least, Hamas won elections. He'd been elected by the people. So when you approach to European countries, European leaders, and ask them to sanction Hamas as a whole, the terror organization, in some cases, they refuse all the drawn legs. Furthermore, it's not just a matter of declaration, but also an enforcement. Hamas and other terror organizations are very smart. They're trying and successfully do bypass sanctions in Western countries, but in the States, the Americans are more, and I think determined to enforce regulations regarding terror financing, but European less. And then you can find many charities within the EU, even though it's declared Hamas as a terror organization after long years, acting for Hamas, raising funds for Hamas, and not being enforced by local authorities because it's a bypass and they're, closing one eye.
They turn a blind eye to it, basically.
Yeah, so basically it's a long-term and consistent effort you should promote, not only to designate these organizations, but also to follow through intelligence and other means on charities and activities that are trying to promote, to recruit more funds from the Western countries, which is by definition wealthier. And if you do not constantly and determinedly promote this effort, you will fail. Another important point, which is, I assume, relevant the day after, because Hamas hopefully will cease to exist in Gaza and maybe in the West Bank, but I assume that there's still be some Hamas people around the world trying to renew its activity and recruit more funds for the activity. And it's relevant for Hezbollah as well. Right. So one of the strategies we have leaded toward Iran, and it was included in the Iran sanctions, was secondary sanctions, which means not only sanctioning Iran, but sanctioning whoever work with Iran, financial institutions, fuel companies, and so forth. So if we establish a secondary sanctions in Europe and in the state against these terror organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, and much more terror organizations acting in different names, but for the same purpose and for the same strategy of Iran, if we manage to establish these secondary sanctions, we might eliminate the resources they have and the resources recruit to buy more arms and ammunitions and strengthens their capabilities to destroy us.
Interesting, and it just means how wider in scope this battle really is when it comes to Hamas. We tend to focus just on what's happening on the ground right now in Gaza or from the air, but there's a lot of other elements and dimensions to this war. And Don, I want to move to you for a moment. One of those dimensions is obviously going to be public diplomacy, and obviously is going to try to be how do we shape the hearts and minds of people who are watching and listening, and maybe influence the at least in the West to a large extent the base of support. And we're going to actually have a talk tomorrow and look a little deeper at campuses and what's happening right now in the U.S. But Donna, you recently wrote a piece for Walla, a very popular news site, maybe the most popular in Israel, about the symmetrical kind of equivalence that's sometimes done between Israel and the Palestinians, like looking at how many are dead here and how many are dead there.
Yes.
But you came to an interesting conclusion. Why don't you share it with us? And this has to do specifically with the hostages, which, by the way, is in the headlines today with the release of the video of 3 hostages, which we'll talk about briefly in a moment as well. So please.
Exactly. Well, I want to relate to that because I'm a bit worried and I'm also a bit shocked with how the world has gone so fast from understanding what really happened in Israel, which is we were brutally attacked. And now it seems that the whole world is trying to attack us and saying we are the bad side. And they're saying like, you are acting really brutally with Gaza people. And when I was looking at a few newspapers and news media and websites, I discovered that they're trying to present in a very awkward, weird way and trying to present like there is a symmetry, and they are showing how many people have died in Israel since year, I don't know, 2001, and how many Palestinians have died in the other side. And I think we need to ask the very important question, why are they doing that? Why the world is trying to present this weird symmetry? And I think the answer is because it really helps them to flatten the story, to shallow the real thing that happened. And I think, there is a thing in psychology, which is like a confirmation bias. It helps them to present the data in the way they want to believe. And we see the rise in the anti-Semitism in the world. How can you present numbers of dead people in both sides? And then you neglect the whole story. And I'm not naive to think that if I will ask them to stop do that, they will. So I'm saying if this is the way they want to present what's going on, let's be more smart than them and say you want to present graphs, you want to try to show symmetry, do a graph which shows how many hostages there are in the both sides. So when they will try to show this data, obviously they don't do this graph, they will see there is not a symmetry. And I don't remember in any of the year that Israel ever hostage and took babies, elderlies, and innocent citizens from their bed. And this is why I think we don't see this graph. And another question maybe we need to ask is, if this war was happening in a different country, do you think those graphs would have been shown? Do you think we have been seeing demonstration? We will see people burning the country's flag? I think we know the answer.
Right. By the way, what you're saying is interesting because maybe that also explains why we're seeing so many videos of people. And there's a lot of eyewitness accounts of people who are ripping down the posters of hostages all over the world, because that might actually be that vulnerable point.
I think you're right.
Right. That you can't. There's no win there, so you might as well just rip it off the subway.
They don't. Of course, when you are, and this is the point Israel need to push more forward, because when we will show the hostages issue, it's not only because it's important to bring them back, it's because this is the way we break what they are trying to present, and there is no symmetry.
So Shmuel, you are a veteran member of the Israeli media, more veteran than myself. You've been around a little longer. Today was something interesting happened here in Israel. I don't know how many of our viewers and listeners paid attention to this, but when Hamas released that video of those 3 female hostages, almost all the Israeli media, as far as I could tell, the mainstream media said and publicly said, we are not going to be publishing this video on our websites. They put up a photo of the video showing the 3 hostages. They named who they were, of course, but they did not show the video, which was one of the women, the one sitting in the middle, yelling at Netanyahu, "You're not doing enough. You have to get us released," etc. Very strong rebuke of the prime minister. Obviously, I think everyone would know a script written for her by her Hamas captors, but doesn't make a difference. And part of me is torn, to be honest. Right? On the one hand, by not publishing it, I feel like the media is taking now, obviously the media in Israel is very aligned with the country right now, no doubt. But that's already taking a very active role in saying, okay, what are we going to show our people? What are we not? Because it's psychological warfare, then we, the media, are deciding what to publish and what to not. But on the other hand, I also understand that this is psychological warfare. So I'm curious, how do you understand this decision, and what do you make of it?
Well, the decision has 2 sides to it. One of them is the issue of being patriotic in a time of war and wanting to not to sabotage the effort of your own country to win a war in which we are all engaged in some sense, both personally as citizens, as people who have sons and daughters in uniform, as people who are invested in the future of this country. And the media in Israel, this is a media of people who are first and foremost Israelis. They do want this country to thrive and survive. And as part of their job, they would not intentionally do something that they perceive as something that is harmful to their own country. In addition to that, we should understand that the media is also a player that has to consider public opinion, public sentiments, public sensitivities, and clearly to broadcast such video is going to be against the wishes of the viewers, television viewers or newspaper readers. I assume that Israelis who truly want to see these videos will find a way to find them somewhere on the web. But by and large, I think that the media understands that in Israel today, it is more important to be seen and perceived as someone who's not trying to hurt Israel and its war effort, which doesn't mean that we cannot report on things that we deem of high importance and that are inconvenient to the public or to the government. There is always a delicate balance between what you think is important and essential to report, and what do you think is truly propaganda of the enemy that is trying to play to your weakness. They're trying to tell you, well, you are the media, you have to use this material, but we don't have to use it. We can say, as responsible media, there are things that we should take into account, and in this case, we don't put on TV. We don't put porn on TV, and we don't put gruesome scenes on TV, and we don't put propaganda on TV.
Yeah. No, interesting. And it says something about the Israeli media, which is usually very cutthroat, that at a time like this, they do know how to set aside the hunt for the clicks and that search and that constant thirst, and be able to focus on what might be important. I want to shift gears for a moment and Shuki, come back to you. Talk just a bit about this whole international law campaign that we have going on, obviously, right? And there's a lot of destruction that's taking place right now in the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of casualties, at least according to the Palestinians. We don't know the exact numbers. It depends who you talk to. Israel says that close to half of those killed are probably armed men. But putting that aside for a moment, I think what we can expect is that after this conflict, there's going to be a lot of judicial persecution, let's call it, or legal warfare against the state of Israel. And I'm curious, Shuki, on the one hand, there's the element of what we're doing, and there's a lot of those legal advisors who are assisting the troops and the units as they approve targets and they go and before they're attacked. But there's also constantly in the back of my mind is the thought of what would have happened had the judicial reform gone through in its entirety when, as the government had initially proposed. JPPI was very instrumental all throughout that process in trying to lead to some sort of compromise. What are your thoughts on that, right? Am I crazy to think that we would be in a whole different reality had the judicial reform gone through and the world would say, well, Israel's judiciary and Israel's Supreme Court is no longer independent? Would that have changed anything?
First of all, you're completely right. And unfortunately, Israel is always on the focus point of international institutions and tribunals working to prosecute war criminals and always charging Israel being a war criminal. We've seen it in the previous operation in Gaza. We've seen it now in ICC, where Palestinians try to promote procedures against Israel. And we've already seen Khan, the persecutor of the ICC, attending to Rafah border yesterday and implying to get into Israel to investigate. So we might want to investigate Hamas crimes against humanity as well, but he would definitely try to find out what Israel is doing to prevent war crimes, etc. And after the war, there will be the aftershock and a huge wave, I assume, of international ambition and efforts to persecute Israel's seniors and Israelis in different venues. And still, and we have discussed it already, as you mentioned before, Israel, even though Hamas committed unprecedented crimes against humanity, following and obeying international law each and every attack she's committing in Gaza. You're right, the casualties tremendous, but international law does not prohibit of in affiliate of civilians attacks to be had in if you proportionally attack military targets. Now, what would happen if the reform would pass? One of the main claims of Israel towards ICC through the years, and I was personally involved in some of these procedures, was complementarity. What is complementarity? The fact that international tribunals are involved or should be involved and investigate war crimes only if the country itself is not satisfyingly doing it. Since international community and legal venues and tribunals had some confidence in what Israel do internally, it successfully prevented involvement and prosecutions so far. If the reform would have been passed, situation might be different and the exposure could be higher. Having said that, the tremendous operation going in Gaza is so unique in its scale that I'm not sure this
will defend the soldiers on its own.
Defend claim would work in this case as well, but still you're right, there might be a difference, and thanks God the reform as planned didn't move.
By the way, I saw that just today that I forget his name at the moment. You would know the prosecutor of the ICC is at the Rafah crossing. Like he's already here on the ground, I guess, trying to collect evidence already. So we should expect that this is definitely
he's here already,
right?
Tending to approach Israel as well. He's been denied to come to Israel,
right?
But he's waiting on Rafah border to collect evidence from Palestinians. So you already investigated.
Yeah, it's already happening. Donna, I want to come back to you. There was the announcement yesterday that Mayor Spiegler, who was the CEO of the Israel Electric Corporation, what's known as Chavat Hashmal, and had been appointed as the coordinator of civilian efforts for the restoration of Gaza, of the communities, the Israeli communities, as well as the efforts for the people, the displaced people, and everything else that needs to happen, decided to step down. It wasn't working out. You had written another piece a couple weeks ago talking about the distinct absence, I would call it, of the ministries and the government in this. I mean, is that still the case? Do you feel like maybe there's been an improvement?
I think, to be honest, I think we are holding ourselves now. If at the beginning we felt, and I think there is a huge group who still feel that, like the government is missing, and there is a huge group of civilians who feel that we are quite alone in this battle. But now, the moment our army went inside Gaza, we are, I think, and I feel that we are holding ourselves on dealing this issue. If we dealt with this issue like a few days ago, and it was really high on the media and on the conversation, now we are trying to hold ourselves because we think it's not the time, and we are saying out loud that there will be a time, maybe after the war will be over, then we will go back to talk about how we are feeling and how we are not really happy with it, and I'm being
disappointed.
Yes, disappointed and not being happy is like very a small word. So I think we are just holding it now, and because we know if we will go on, maybe this is what Hamas wants. This is the same way why we don't show the hostages, and we're trying to take our feelings inside and wait for the right moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Shmuel, before we wrap up, we obviously spoke a bit about this yesterday. Netanyahu's middle of the night tweet and the fallout of that. He then deleted it. It's still very much in the headlines. Today, he paid a visit to a police base together with Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we haven't seen for a while. It's good to know that he's still around and everything's okay with him. But visiting a police unit, and they're talking about complimenting the Shabak. The head of the Shabak was one of the people who he singled out in that tweet. Do you feel that that was a moment that maybe we can now say, if we thought that maybe Netanyahu was not completely with it, not completely in charge, he's back, he's got everything under control, he has the reins, can Israelis relax a bit?
Well, the tweet was a grave mistake by the prime minister. I was in a meeting just this morning with a veteran Israeli political consultant, and he enlightened me in some way. He said, look at the advisors of the prime minister. It's the first time in which the advisors made sure to distance themselves from what was happening. There were leaks to the press with the names of each of the advisors saying, I was not part of this discussion, or when this discussion took place, I opposed the idea of sending out this tweet. When you see the advisors of a prime minister trying to distance themselves from a recent decision by him, that's not a good sign. It was leaked that some members of his family were behind the tweet and put pressure on him, that there was an ongoing discussion that took around 3 hours before the tweet was sent out. It was not a good moment for him. Would it have a long-lasting impact on his ability to regain his approval rating, to go up in the polls, to get the confidence of the nation? I'm not sure. It's really late in the game, and one of the issues for the prime minister is that all Israelis are already highly familiar with him. There are no surprises with him. Either you love him or you hate him. He's not going to surprise us by being someone else. And you know,
you can see that we are all smiling when you said that, Shmuel. Me, like, this is true. Shmuel is saying it correct. We all smile because this is what's happening in Israel.
No, I was going through my head was what could he do that would surprise me, and I had something that was not, you know, we shouldn't joke around. No. I was gonna say he would comb his hair instead of one way the other way. Like that would be something that would surprise me, because it's only one way. Yes. Sorry.
Look, Prime Minister Netanyahu has many qualities and many advantages as a leader. He's been Israel's dominant leader for the last quarter of a century. He entered this war having trouble with public confidence, and he did not improve on this situation by making several mediocre statements or speeches and then tweeting out what he tweeted the other day. Then again, he is our leader at this time. We must stand behind the war effort and support the cabinet. It's not, you know, the prime minister in Israel he's not a king, he's not a Caesar, he's not even a US president. He's a prime minister. There is a cabinet, and we support the effort of the IDF and of the cabinet. And as you know, all political considerations, we'll come back to it when the war ends, hopefully in a victory.
I think you hear from Shmuel the same way I was saying, that we are holding ourselves now.
Right. Well, we will hold back no longer. And thank you all for joining JPPI tonight. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Shuki. And thank you, Shmuel. And thanks to all our viewers and our listeners. We hope and pray, as always, for a quiet and peaceful evening. And we will be back here tomorrow, 5 p.m. Israel time, 11 a.m. on the East Coast.